Joining me next are Montgomery County District Attorney Darryl Bailey and Executive Director of the Alabama District Attorneys Association, Barry Matson. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Well, this is an interesting time to have you on because here we're getting towards the session. We're getting into the part of the session, the real meat of it. And a lot of bills dealing with criminal justice, crime, cracking down on crime. We saw one last week, not just pass the legislature, but be signed into law dealing with fentanyl trafficking. Big priority, top priority for your organization and pretty much everybody in this building. Talk about fentanyl, the impact of that law now, and maybe some other bills also along the same issue. Barry, I'll start with you.
Well, probably 6 or 7 years ago, we saw a shift in fentanyl in Alabama become more synthetic fentanyl from the cartels, and it changed kind of the perspective in what we knew fentanyl to be, what our laws addressed, which was prior to that mostly black market pharmaceutical fentanyl. In 2018, we passed two fentanyl trafficking bills. One dealt with a mixture of fentanyl with other drugs, and one was pure fentanyl. Mm-hmm. The bill this year adds the mandatory minimum punishments with pure fentanyl trafficking, which we did not have prior to that date. And it's very important because the trafficking in fentanyl are the people that are in business, the enterprise of moving these dangerous drugs, not the street level user or an addict, but people that are in the business of moving larger weights of fentanyl.
And can I ask you sort of what it means from a local perspective to know that, we hear about all the time between the 65 and 85, sort of these corridors that trafficking can happen. You're at the confluence of those. What can that mean at the local level to have that prosecutorial tool?
Oh, it's going to be a great tool. One of the things that we're seeing in Montgomery is a ton of overdose deaths, and they're due to fentanyl. If you went back 5-10 years ago, we had heroin or methamphetamine, and we still have those, but right now everything's being dominated by fentanyl. And so we're seeing a lot of people who are overdosing on it and dying, but we're also seeing the danger to law enforcement. We have had several law enforcement officers in our community that have become seriously ill because of exposure to fentanyl and had to be revived in some cases.
So this is they're either arresting a suspect or maybe assisting someone who's on an overdose themselves, and that's how they're exposed to it?
Both ways. And most of the time it's during a traffic stop. That's the way I have seen it more commonly. But yeah, it's extremely dangerous to our officers.
It's really scary just to think that any random traffic stop, you could yourself be exposed to a drug you'd never intended to use.
No doubt about it.
Wow. Well, I know that y'all have other items on your legislative agenda. Gun crime, legislation having to do with gun crime. What kind of bills are y'all looking at?
Well, we have a bill that addresses violent gun crime in particular, and Darryl Bailey, he's president of our association this year. And
I should have mentioned that. President of the statewide organization. I'm sorry. Yes.
And this was a particularly interest to Darryl, and so we really want to address the use of firearms during the course of particularly dangerous felonies. So we've identified felonies that are dangerous to human life. And a list that no one would disagree with, and if you use a firearm during the course of one of those crimes, or you're out on bail for one of those crimes and you're later convicted of that crime, or if you've been convicted in the past 25 years of one of those crimes and you possess a firearm, there are either enhancements, mandatory minimum, or it's a new crime. And so these specifically address those very violent crimes that are committed with a firearm. And we've worked with law enforcement across the state, gun advocacy groups, national and in-state, and have gotten really unanimous sign-off on the appropriateness of this bill, and we expect it to be filed on Tuesday, and we'll address it publicly more so next week. But I believe it's going to be a really great tool for us in law enforcement to be able to focus on violent crime and the use of a firearm during those particular crimes.
And that's really the centerpiece of a package that we are presenting. What we have noticed is that these folks who commit a violent crime, when they do go and serve their sentence, or even when they're out on bail, those are the ones who are more likely to commit another violent crime. So that's why we're addressing this. It really is modeled after the federal law. If you can remember back in the 90s when a program called ICE, it's not the immigration one, but Isolate the Criminal Elements, what it stood for, that was really big in its heyday in helping curb crime, especially in Alabama. We saw it work. And we're really modeling this law after that. We've never had a law like this in Alabama, which creates mandatory time for those who either use a firearm during a violent offense or those who have been convicted of a violent offense who are subsequently caught with a firearm. We believe two things. One, it will get those folks off the street. And the second thing is it will send a message.
Well, I'm sitting here listening to you describe this law, and I'm just kind of surprised something like this isn't already on the books.
You would think that it would be, but it's not. And the one about if you are out on bail,
on bail for a violent offense, that's just kind of why wouldn't that be already a law?
It should be, and that's one reason that we're pushing this now is because it should be a law.
Well, look, and I don't have any statistics in front of me, but there is, especially in cities, just a fear of gun crime, of violent crime. Sure, you don't want the break-ins, you don't want the petty kind of stuff, but people are scared of the gun crime. Do you feel that as a prosecutor? Is that what you hear from constituents locally? Is that there's this fear of increased crime, violent crime?
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, it's all over. I was leaving work just Thursday night, and I hear gunshots ringing out about 6:30. Right downtown here. I mean, it's something that I get almost every day, a complaint from a citizen that they hear gunshots in their neighborhood, or there's a murder that's happened in their neighborhood, or a shooting that's happened in their neighborhood. It's really become an increasing problem, and it's really just prevalent right now especially in our major metropolitan areas such as Montgomery.
I want to move to retail theft, because I know that's another plank in your legislative agenda. What are you trying to accomplish with this retail theft bill?
Well, Alabama's never had an organized retail theft bill. One of the things that we are frustrated with as prosecutors is that there's really no punishment for those who go and steal from these businesses. And these mom and pop businesses or these major retail outlets, they're on razor thin margins, a lot of them, especially the mom and pop stores. And retail theft has become a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States.
When you say there's no penalty, so if I go get caught shoplifting, I'm not going to...
Right now in the state of Alabama, you can go and steal up to $1,500. I hate to advertise this, but it's true. You can go and steal up to $1,500, and it is illegal for you to be sent to prison.
Okay. Well, what about like at the county jail or something like that?
No, can't do that either.
Really?
It is illegal for you to be incarcerated if you steal up to $1,500. Now, there's some factors that can play in that can get you to that point. But if you just go and you can commit, you can go from store to store to store in Montgomery today, steal $1,500 at each one of those, and it is illegal for a judge to send you to prison. A lot of people don't know that, and our major businesses, our mom and pop businesses are very frustrated with that. That is a Class D felony that was passed by the legislature some years ago. And it's been a failure, and we as prosecutors see it, our business community has seen it. So what we're wanting to do with this retail theft is, one, let's get rid of that Class D felony. Let's make it where you are eligible to go to prison. We need these people that commit these type of crimes to have some type of fear that they could go to prison. It's destroyed our drug courts, our diversion programs. And what I mean by that is if you are a defendant who's been arrested and charged with committing one of these Class D felonies, your attorney is going to come to you and say, listen, you can plead guilty or go to trial and be found guilty. It's illegal for the judge to send you to prison, so you cannot go to prison. They're going to put you on probation. You're going to have a probation officer who's overloaded, who's not going to have really time to check on you. Or you can go over here and go to Darryl Bailey's drug court or diversion program. He's going to make you get a job. He's going to make you do community service. He's going to make you go to counseling. He's going to make you do all these things. You're going to have to stay on it for 6 months to a year. You're going to get drug tested and all those things that go along with that. Which one would you rather do? Well, you're going to take the easy way out, right?
There's very little incentive not to, right?
And most of these individuals are addicted, and their addiction will continue. Their problem where they go out and commit more crimes is going to continue. And it really does nothing to help curb these problems and help these businesses stay in business.
So in this reform that you're proposing, is part of the goal to get more of those into your diversion programs and not necessarily prison?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's really the whole goal, because such as in Montgomery, we are 94% successful in our diversion program. which means that 94% of the people who graduate and complete and graduate our pretrial diversion program never get back in trouble again.
Okay.
That's what we want. But there's no incentive for anyone to go and commit to one of these programs and complete one of these programs if they don't have something hanging over their head. No
Understand.
incentive.
Yeah, and all too often it is kind of put as a, mutually exclusive between, well, you either want them to go to prison or you want them out, but there are these programs, and I think that's what you're saying is, if there's no incentive to go, then why have it?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what the part of the problem is. There's been this narrative that I think some parts of the public may believe. I think there are some organizations that perpetuate the narrative. It's a false narrative that we have in the past, or we are now, or that's our desire to send low-level property offenders and drug offenders to prison. We haven't then. Our prisons now are 85%, 80% violent. The people that are, if you look at any snapshot of any given day, and someone's in there for not a violent crime, they're there for either a dip or a dump, which is a term of art used in probation and parole revocation for a short period of time, 30, 45 days, or they're there for a drug treatment program. And so those people are always different every 6 weeks, different names, but that 85% constant are violent offenders in prison. So, we weren't back in 2015, and we aren't now, and that's not our desire now to necessarily send somebody to prison for a low-level theft. But if you're addicted, or you have no base of support in your life that is a rational thought to go into a store and steal $1,000 worth of merchandise to pay your bills or to feed your addiction, then you're not capable really of getting out of that cycle. And so the only thing we have really in our system in our state, unfortunately, are the specialty courts, drug court, veterans courts, mental health courts, and they're effective. We've seen thousands of people's lives turned around by going into those courts where a judge is engaged in caring, or prosecutors are on top of it, the defense lawyer, their lawyer is there engaged. These programs work, and we're seeing them kind of dry up and wither because a defendant who's an addict or has some type of issue, like D.A. Bailey said, would rather go and do nothing and take their chances, because we even now, if you drug test positive on probation, it's a technical violation, so you can't be revoked for that. So they can go out and, to a degree, reoffend on probation, whereas if they were in drug court, we've just seen those. We know those people. We know their faces. We hear from them, and you run into them out in the community, and they come up and thank you for holding me accountable, and it changed my life. And we don't have that right now because of the D felony.
Well, we'd like to see where all those pieces of legislation go. You brought up the whole, prison incarceration thing and what other groups say. I was talking to Carla Crowder. She's at Appleseed. There's one of those organizations that has a completely different perspective on this, and she brought up this point that we were specifically talking about the good time law that Senator Weaver's pushing, but it kind of more broadly applied to more legislation than just that. And her point was, every time the legislature goes and increases penalties for something or makes it more likely that somebody goes to prison for something, they're going backwards in terms of complying with these court orders or I guess the one court order for prison overcrowding, for addressing prison overcrowding and all that. What would you say to that argument that we do have a prison overcrowding problem, and the legislature's tried different things, their Department of Corrections has tried different things to bring it down, but it hasn't done a whole lot, and that new laws might make that harder?
Well, one of the things I would say is we have to make room for people who commit violent crimes. There are some people that I come across that need to be separated from society. There are people right now walking the streets of Montgomery that would rather shoot you than have a conversation with you. Those folks don't need to be walking around with the rest of us. We have to protect Alabamians from those type of individuals. So we've got to make more room for those type of individuals.
And Todd, I would say that the threat of the prison overcrowding and the lawsuit and all that kind of stuff has become kind of the sounding board or the mouthpiece of this kind of prison reform industrial complex we have in Alabama and around the country. That's the drum they beat. Oh, look, the feds, and we've got this lawsuit, and we've got this nasty letter from DOJ. Government's first responsibility is to protect its citizens, number one. number one. And I know I meet and talk and discuss these things with a lot of these groups, and I don't have the luxury of using if I'm at a sentencing event with somebody who's committed a rape robbery, to sit down with the defense attorney, the judge, and the victim and the community and try to figure out, is there a bed down there for this person to stay in? We've got to remove this person from society because they've raped a child, they've killed an elderly parent, and we don't have the luxury of that. We've got to have space for them. And I think our state is working on doing that and developing it. And I think it's very ironic that the groups that assail our prison conditions are also the ones saying we shouldn't build bigger and better prisons that provide better services, mental health services, medical health services. That is the irony there, and it should be very telling to what maybe their goal is to just in a lot of cases to decriminalize, to remove tools from law enforcement to be more effective, because they see the police or prosecutors as bad folks rather than people that are trying to protect the community, which is exactly what we're trying to do.
And we've seen that happen in some of our major cities across the United States. I mean, you see what's happened in San Francisco and LA and Philadelphia, where, I mean, just crime has taken over. They got so frustrated with it in San Francisco, they ousted the DA.
Yeah, recalled him, right?
Yeah, because that DA was not sending people to prison. And you know, there's a lot of focus right now on district attorneys for not doing their job. And we want to make sure here in Alabama, our district attorneys not only do their job, but they have the tools and resources to do it.
Would you say, y'all talk a lot about, all the district, is it 42?
42.
42, all the different circuits throughout the state. I mean, look, you're never going to all agree on the same thing, but would you say generally y'all are all supportive of this legislative package? Yes. and those kind of things?
Yeah, it was unanimous. We met on this. We've discussed it very thoroughly in coming up with a few bills that we wanted to focus on. And we had a unanimous agreement that this was going to be our legislative package. So, yeah, we have all agreed on this.
Interesting. Well, while you're here, I need to ask you about this. We had yet another mass shooting today, 4 killed at least up there in Louisville. And obviously that's not your jurisdiction. It's not in the state. But every time one of these comes up, one of these happens, these tragedies, people ask, okay, what can be done? One of the proposals that gets floated are these red flag laws where I think they passed it in Florida after the Parkland thing, where law enforcement or a judge, both maybe, could be engaged to a situation where someone who is clearly in mental health crisis, clearly a danger to themselves or others, where maybe a gun could be removed through a legal process. Not saying the likelihood of that passing the legislature, but as a prosecutor, as someone who represents prosecutors, would that kind of law be helpful to you in terms of preventing some of this stuff, or is that even on your radar?
Yeah, Todd, I think that with something like that, the devil's in the details. Because what happens is, and you're exactly right about what that would involve. There's someone who, family member, public, law enforcement, someone has identified as maybe has some issues, that they could be a threat to the community because possessing a firearm would enhance that. Somebody needs to go there and remove the firearm. The problem is the list of things and who can bring that petition. Second Amendment gun right advocates are fearful that if you get on a list, who could bring that complaint, and once it's on the books, it could be broadened, and then it's just a slippery slope to taking firearms. And I get that. It's also kind of a danger to law enforcement to if you say, okay, go to that house and take those guns from that person in that house. There's no way that's going to not be potentially a violent encounter. And so there's a lot of issues with red flag laws that I think need to be worked out. And I think there is probably common ground where all sides could sit down and agree to certain language. I just haven't seen it in Alabama yet. There's been a couple of bills in the past that were filed, and we've looked at them. Law enforcement had concerns because they felt like they might be in jeopardy going in the seizure of the guns, because maybe the due process that led up to that wasn't quite what it needed to be. But I think if there's adequate due process and a fairness, and maybe let the public vote on it, put it out to a ballot issue, then you could do it. But potentially. But I see where it's a tool that could be used, but it could also be misused. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not Pollyanna about this. Yeah. I think every time one of these things happens, it's natural to sort of say, "Oh man, what can we do?" But this is a very complicated thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Second Amendment is no joke, and there's hundreds of millions of guns already on the out there. It's just. It is one of those policy prescriptions that other states have taken up, and so I thought it might be useful to talk about.
Sure. Well, the easy answer is let's get the guns out of the hands of violent felons.
Well, I think everybody can agree on that.
That's one of those compromises I think that Barry was speaking about. If we can, and I think we can all agree on that. So let's get this legislature to pass those kind of laws.
Okay. We'll leave it at. We're out of time. We're over time, but that's okay.
Okay.
Really appreciate you gentlemen coming on, and hope to have you back as this legislation moves through.
Great.
Thank you so
very
much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll be right back.